My parents didn't pay for my college, and now they want me to loan them money to pay for my sister's wedding. I reminded them of how they were against borrowing money when I needed it. I'm 34 years old man and work as a software developer. Compared to the rest of my family, I earn a lot more money. My mom is a retired music teacher, and my dad runs a local hardware store. I also have a younger sister, Catherine, who's 30 years old. I haven't been in contact with her for the last 5 years, mainly because she's a horrible, spoiled, entitled person, and my parents did nothing to discourage her behavior. I put up with her for a long time, but 5 years ago, she brought her new boyfriend to Christmas dinner. I was hosting that year. I just moved into a new apartment and wanted to do something special, but as always, Catherine ruined the entire gathering by making unnecessary comments about how small and outdated my home was and that it wasn't even in a nice neighborhood. She wouldn't stop bragging about her new boyfriend, who turned out to be quite wealthy, and how he lived in a mansion that was more than 10 times the size of my apartment. I couldn't take it anymore and told her that, unlike her boyfriend, I had moved into this apartment and paid for everything myself, something neither she nor her boyfriend could claim. I also told her that if her standards were so high, she could leave my house and never come back. She and her boyfriend obviously took offense because everything I said was true, and they left. We haven't spoken since, and my parents have tried hard to reconcile us, but I don't want anything to do with her. Up until now, the only reason I maintained contact with her was because of my parents, but I can't keep doing that. It's been 5 years since we last spoke, and recently I learned that she got engaged to her boyfriend, the same guy from 5 years ago, and that they're getting married in a few months. My parents, foolishly, insisted on covering the cost of the wedding venue and decorations because they didn't want to be outdone by the groom's parents. I think this was a pretty stupid move on their part because, first of all, they should have known their daughter has expensive tastes that would be way out of their budget. Second, they had no way of competing with the groom's parents, who are far more financially stable than our family. I don't even know what they were thinking, but they had already committed, and the wedding was just a few months away. Of course, with what my sister was planning, my parents realized they couldn't afford to cover everything since her wedding plans were way out of their budget. They came to me a few days ago to ask for a loan. Although we've had a good relationship in recent years, I had to refuse them because of something that happened many years ago. The reason I'm on Reddit now asking if I did the right thing is that many relatives have told me I'm being petty, and I really don't think so. When I was about to graduate high school and start college, my parents told me they wouldn't cover my tuition or any other expenses because now that I was 18, I was on my own. I was a bit shocked because my parents had always been very supportive, so this seemed out of character for them. But they said that back in their day, they had to fend for themselves after turning 18 because their parents didn't have enough money to support them once they became adults, and apparently, this made them strong and independent, so they wanted me to do the same. They hadn't even set aside any money for my sister or me. They wanted us to work through college like they had. My major wasn't easy, so I really didn't want to waste my time working while studying because I wasn't sure I could maintain my grades. College isn't cheap either. It's quite expensive, so no effort would have been enough. I suggested that maybe we could take out a student loan for me, but my parents disagreed. Even when I suggested we could borrow money from some relatives and pay it back later, they said it was insulting to even suggest such a thing. They said it was against their principles to borrow money because it was pathetic. I even remember arguing with them a lot about this specific issue, but in the end, I managed to get my grandparents to help me take out a student loan, and that's how I graduated. I was really angry with my parents at the time for this, but eventually, I forgave them. However, that doesn't mean I forgot about it entirely. My sister never had this problem because she didn't even go to college. She didn't think it was necessary because she knew she would just take over Dad's business in the future or simply get married, and that's exactly what she's doing. So good for her. Anyway, the bottom line is that I remember what my parents said about borrowing money when I suggested we could take a loan to cover my college education, and they said no because it was against their principles. So now, according to their principles, this should still be something they're against. When it came to my college funds, all they cared about were their principles. But now that Catherine wants to get married and have a grand wedding, suddenly they've forgotten all about that. I thought it was very convenient for them, and I wasn't going to let this slide because they caused me a lot of trouble back then. And I really don't think my sister's wedding is more important than my college education, because if I hadn't been able to complete my degree and get the grades I did, I probably wouldn't have this job and wouldn't even be in a position to help them financially. So when they approached me for help, I reminded them of what they said about loans and borrowing money and how it was against their principles and all that. They were a bit stunned because I don't think they expected me to remember all of this, even after so many years, but I remembered it very well. After talking to them, they had nothing to say to me and simply went home quietly. I thought that would be the end of it. But then a bunch of relatives started contacting me and telling me that the way I treated my parents was very humiliating for them and that they were very upset about it. Apparently, my parents had told everyone that I had changed after earning so much money and was now throwing it in their faces, trying to humiliate them even after everything they had done for me. I didn't think that was an accurate representation of what I did at all. I simply stood up against something I felt was unfair, and that was it. So I ended up not talking to my parents at all, because if they really had a problem with what I said, they should have confronted me right then and there instead of going behind my back to complain to the rest of the family. I also didn't talk to the rest of the family because if they couldn't understand where I was coming from, I had nothing more to say to them. Anyway, it's not like I was invited to my sister's wedding, so I don't think I needed to contribute in the first place. For the past few days, I haven't had any contact with my parents or anyone else in the family. I've been quite happy about it because I don't think I did anything wrong. But 2 days ago, my parents visited me again, and this time they were very upset. They told me that, apparently, because of me, they had been uninvited from my sister's wedding. I don't understand how I could have caused that since I haven't had any contact with Catherine at all, but they said that when they told her they couldn't finance the wedding and needed some help from her and her in-laws to cover the costs of the things they couldn't pay for, she lost her temper. She started pressuring them to find the money somehow because, at this stage, if she had to ask her in-laws for financial help, it would make her family look bad, and she didn't want that. She had a point because if my parents weren't sure they could cover the costs of what they had promised, they shouldn't have committed in the first place. Usually she is very spoiled and has a sense of superiority, but I don't think she was wrong in what she said here. Personally, I think she and her fiancé should have covered the entire cost themselves since their family is wealthy enough to afford it. But if my parents made a commitment, they should honor it. And she's right that they're making themselves look bad in front of her in-laws. So I'd say she had every right to be angry, and I told my parents that. I said I had nothing to do with this because I didn't tell them to commit to something like that. They brought it on themselves and had no one else to blame but themselves. At this point, I'd definitely say that completely uninviting them from the wedding was an overreaction on my sister's part, but then again, what did they expect from Catherine? She's always been this way, and they are responsible for it, not me. However, my parents simply weren't ready to hear this, and kept insisting that if I had just helped them and loaned them some money, instead of being so petty and holding on to old grudges, they wouldn't be in this situation now. I thought it was very unfair for them to blame me, so I asked them to leave, and they did. But they kept pushing, and now the whole family has turned against me, accusing me of being selfish and heartless. Personally, I don't think I did anything wrong, but anyway, am I the bad guy here for refusing to contribute to my sister's wedding because my parents can't afford it? Update 1. I've decided to cut off all contact with my entire family. The incredible thing is that both my dad's and mom's sides of the family are united against me right now, except for my grandparents. My maternal grandparents are no longer alive, but my paternal grandparents are on my side and have been trying to maintain peace in the family, but even they are getting tired of this drama. Everyone in the family has had their differences in the past, but I guess their hatred of me has brought them together. Well, at least I'm glad I was able to do something good for the family. But now I've blocked everyone, and I really don't want any more drama right now. Someone in the comments suggested that the real reason everyone seems to hate me so much and needs a reason to turn against me is probably envy, and I think that's a pretty valid point. I don't want to praise myself, but I'm doing much better than most people in my family, and I don't think they can stand it. I never really followed anyone's advice while growing up. Most of them told me to just get a business degree and take over my dad's business because that's where the future was, instead of constantly being in front of a computer. And guess what? That's how I make my living now. There's the fact that I'm much more successful than most of my cousins, and not only are they jealous of me, but their parents also seem to resent me. It simply doesn't make sense to me, because I think families should be happy for each other's successes and share in that joy, but that's never been the case. And sometimes it makes me really sad, but I can't help it. Some people are just like that. I bet my parents are already enjoying the fact that everyone is against me right now because, according to them, I'm the one who got them uninvited from my sister's wedding. We haven't spoken since they came last time to accuse me of ruining their relationship with my sister, which I still don't understand. But my grandparents have told me they're not speaking to them either. Since my grandparents are on my side, it just shows how ungrateful they really are, because my grandparents have helped them many times in the past, and yet they don't seem to remember any of that. And that makes me quite happy I didn't help them when they came to me, because I'm pretty sure they would have conveniently forgotten it in the future. They take everything for granted, and it's high time someone taught them a lesson, even if it has to be someone as terrible as Catherine. Update 2. Something really curious happened yesterday. I was very busy, so I couldn't share it here, but Catherine came to visit me after I got home from work. She showed up at my house about an hour later, and I was very surprised because, as I think I mentioned, we haven't spoken to each other in the last 5 years, and we don't have a good relationship. I was pretty sure she was here to talk about her wedding with me because now that our parents aren't even invited, I'm sure she needs money. But she was smart enough not to start with that. Instead, she told me she was here to apologize for everything she had done in the past. She said she was about to start a new chapter in her life by getting married and wanted to formally extend an invitation to me before anyone else to make up for her past behavior. She claimed she really regretted being a spoiled child, but it wasn't entirely her fault because our parents never said anything about her behavior either. So she grew up believing she was acting normally and acceptably in society. But now that she's older, she knows she's been a terrible person and is trying to make amends with everyone she's wronged in the past. She thought there was no better place to start than with me because, as her brother, I had endured her more than anyone else. I let her speak, and once she finished her little speech, I told her I was fine with it and glad she had finally come to her senses and apologized. But I knew there was more to come, and I was patiently waiting for it. And of course, she then started telling me that she knew our parents had been horrible to me too, because she'd heard from other relatives what they'd been saying about me, that I was selfish, heartless, and stingy just because I refused to contribute to her wedding. She tried to flatter me and said I was completely right in what I had said because, at the end of the day, they never helped me after I turned 18, and they were the ones who committed to helping pay for the wedding. So it wasn't my responsibility to bail them out when they were in trouble, especially considering the fact that we didn't have a good relationship in the first place. I knew she was gearing up for something, and I just waited for her to finally say it. After I didn't say anything for a while, she finally told me that now that our parents were no longer invited, they had withdrawn the funds they had promised for so long. She started ranting about how unfair that was because they were the ones who said they'd cover at least some expenses, and now she was too embarrassed to go to her fiancé and tell him that. After the fight she had with her parents, they wouldn't be covering anything, and his parents would have to pay for everything. That's why she was here, to ask if I'd be willing to help her out in this difficult time, just this once, and she would be forever grateful. She even said she was willing to sign a contract or whatever was necessary to make sure I knew she'd pay me back eventually, hopefully by the end of the year. But she just needed me to help her out right now and save her the embarrassment of having to tell her fiancé about all of this. I found it interesting that she was willing to promise to pay the money back. She was even willing to involve paperwork, which would make it quite official. But I told her I needed time to think about it because ultimately, even though she apologized, we're still not exactly on good terms, and our relationship is still very tense. I thought she'd understand, but it turned out she was quite shameless and said I was being very stingy, and it wasn't much that she was asking from me as her brother. That was pretty ironic coming from her since, for the past 5 years, we haven't had any kind of relationship at all, let alone a sibling one. From the start, I already knew she was only here to ask for money, not to apologize. I told her she was just like our parents, selfish and always looking out for her own benefit. Obviously, she got mad at me after that and started yelling at me, but I'm not my parents. I had no reason to put up with that. I immediately told her to leave my house because I wasn't going to tolerate that kind of behavior. Initially, she refused to leave, but I grabbed her arm and forced her out. She kept saying she'd call the police for assaulting her, but I didn't care. Eventually, she left, and I was quite upset for a while. But now, this is just a ridiculously funny incident to me, and I'm not letting it bother me. Update 3. It's been a couple of weeks since my last update, and I just assumed that, since my sister and I were on bad terms, the invitation she extended to me had been revoked. But today, I was pleasantly surprised to receive an invitation to her wedding. I didn't know how to interpret it, so I decided to contact her. At first, she didn't answer, but a few hours later, she finally called me back. She was quite curt with me over the phone when I thanked her for inviting me, so I decided to ask her what was going on because I was pretty confused. She told me that she really meant her apology that day and that she's genuinely trying to be a better person now. She also mentioned that she had managed to get the money on her own, so she no longer needed anyone's help. But she wanted me to know she wasn't pretending to make amends just for my money and that she meant every word she said that day. She also told me that our parents actually made her realize how spoiled she had been in the past, and she's been trying really hard not to become like them at this point. So I decided to ask if she wanted to invite them as well, and she told me that contrary to what they've been telling people, she never actually uninvited them. They had put themselves in a very difficult position. Apparently, it's not like our parents were ever unaware of what my sister wanted for her wedding. From the beginning, she warned them that what she was planning was quite grand, and she didn't think they'd have enough to cover it all. But they were overly confident about it. So after boasting so much, it would have been quite embarrassing for her to tell her in-laws that her parents were all talk and couldn't actually afford what they had promised. It was the fact that they didn't even bother to think things through and were so determined to compete with her in-laws that really upset her. And as she was yelling at them, they were the ones who decided she no longer wanted them at her wedding and uninvited themselves. She hadn't even told them that, nor had she implied it, but they came to that conclusion on their own and did exactly what they're doing with me, talking to everyone else about it instead of confronting her and talking to her about it. I have to admit, it's really twisted that they're going around telling people their kids are so terrible when they themselves don't even bother to clear things up with us when they have the chance to do so. Of course, after saying such horrible things about us to everyone else, we're not going to be very inclined to work things out with them. And yet, they'll still find a way to blame us. They just want to constantly play the victim, and I'm glad my sister is finally seeing that now. Catherine told me the rest of the family hasn't marginalized her the way they've done to me, but she's still thinking about whether she wants to invite them because they seem pretty firmly on our parents' side here. However, with me, they were very unpleasant. But with her, most of them were still trying to explain why our parents were right instead of directly accusing her of anything. I think it might have something to do with the fact that my parents are too proud to apologize, but not too proud to rely on their children financially in the future. And since my grandparents are no longer going to help them, they at least need Catherine on their side to keep that door open. That's just my theory, though I'm not entirely sure what's really going on. But I do know they're treating Catherine very differently than they treated me, and it's sad, but it's not something I'm unaccustomed to. At least Catherine is starting to see the truth now, and if she's really trying to be a better person, I think I'll give her a chance. After talking on the phone, she also apologized for making a scene the other day and said she'd really be happy to have me at the wedding because at least someone from the family should be there. I haven't made a decision yet about whether I want to go or not, but I'll wait a couple of days before reaching out to her about whether I'll attend. It's not easy to repair a relationship that's been broken for 5 years, but I also don't want to be the kind of person who always holds grudges and never lets anything go. That would be a miserable way to live. I've even discussed this with my grandparents, and they've told me that if I decide to go, they'll attend too. At first, they weren't sure if they wanted to go, but given the current circumstances, they might want to since it seems Catherine is reconsidering her relationship with the rest of the family and might not invite them. Update 4. Yesterday, I attended Catherine's wedding. Well, saying I attended might be misleading. I actually walked her down the aisle. Unfortunately, our parents didn't apologize to her or even reach out to her before the wedding, so they weren't invited. She was very upset about it for a couple of days before the wedding, and she reached out to ask if I'd be willing to walk her down the aisle because she really needed someone there to provide emotional support. I immediately agreed because no matter what happened in the past, no one deserves to be treated like that, especially by their own parents over some silly fight. I always knew it would be much easier for my parents to emotionally distance themselves from me because my sister was always the golden child. But seeing this side of them, realizing they were too proud and selfish to even try to mend their relationship with the one daughter who had mattered to them all her life, was just low. They're part of the reason my sister was a terrible person in the past. It's because no one ever bothered to correct her. As parents, it should have been their responsibility, but they never seemed to care how she behaved and always thought it was a good idea to let her be, which ended up spoiling her. I'm not saying it's entirely their fault, but they could have done something to prevent it, and they didn't. Anyway, when Catherine asked me to walk her down the aisle, I agreed, and she really seemed grateful for all of this because even the few family members she invited to the wedding declined the invitation. I guess everyone wants to support my parents and be part of the drama. However, I managed to get my grandparents to attend, and she apologized to all of us before the ceremony. Her fiancé also apologized to me for the way he'd treated me all those years ago. Catherine told me she had told her fiancé the whole truth about the situation with her parents, and he told her not to worry about the money, he'd take care of everything. That's how they worked things out. She almost broke down before the ceremony because our parents wouldn't be there, but her fiancé, our grandparents, and I told her not to let them ruin such a special day for her. I wouldn't say everything is perfect now, but we're moving forward. I'm really willing to believe she has changed as a person, and when I saw her yesterday, I genuinely believe she meant it when she said she wanted to start fresh. So, many people might disagree with my decision, but I think I'm doing the right thing. Update 5. I'm back here after more than a year, maybe 2. I haven't checked when my last update was, but I have great news. My sister is a mother now. She had her daughter a month ago, and thinking back to everything we went through with my parents at her wedding, I remembered this post. Neither of us has spoken to our parents again, and they haven't even met their granddaughter. The ones who have visited her are my grandparents, who are now great-grandparents. I wish this could be a happy update in the sense that everything is better with my parents, but it's certainly not. We've made peace with the fact that our parents aren't in our lives, and that's just how we live now. I don't even think an apology would mean anything at this point because, in all this time, they haven't even tried to approach us or fix things. But that's okay. Some people grow up without parents and turn out fine after all. That said, when it's my turn to be a parent, I'll definitely keep everything I went through with them in mind and use it to be a better parent. I think that's the least I owe my future kids, and also my niece, as her uncle.